My name is Pat Cluck. I was here full-time for 25 years, and I was a professor of accounting.
Okay. And Kate, what your full name and what you did at the
Yes,
college?
my name is Kate McLaughlin, and I was here about 25 years too. Pat and I started about the same time, and I was in the math department.
Okay. So, well, let me start with Pat. Pat, you started in what year?
I started full-time in 1985, but I was part-time for a few years before that.
Okay. How did you hear about the college?
Well, actually, I saw an ad in the paper when I started part-time, and I decided to apply. My children were small, and I applied, and I got the job teaching adjunct, and I loved it. I really and truly loved it. I had been working in the business world years before, and I thought, well, this really is something I really enjoy doing. And then when a full-time opening came up, I applied.
And Kate, how did you hear about the position or the college?
I was also a part-time before this. I was working at Pratt & Whitney. I had taught high school for many years, and then I had gone back to UConn to get a master's degree in statistics. And when I got that degree, I ended up going to Pratt & Whitney and working in statistical process control at Pratt & Whitney for a year. And while I was there was a program here that was started by Chuck Regan, and it was a statistical process control program with courses in statistics and process control, and they asked me if I would teach one of those courses. And then, similar to Pat, a full-time position came up, and I applied for it and got the full-time position, which I also started in 1985 in the math department.
Well, let me throw out the question. What was the college like in the early to mid-'80s?
I think faculty-wise about the same size, I believe. When I started part-time, I was teaching in a building on Hartford Road that had no extras to it. There was a classroom, and that was it. Not much to it at all. But when I started full-time, the Low building just opened, and at the time, we thought that was the most wonderful thing that could happen. But then I also taught in the lower campus, so the East Campus, I guess.
And Kate, when you started, I think the Low building was probably a year old or something like that.
Right.
But you, where were your offices? Kate, your office was East Campus? Or?
Yes, it was. And I was in the building that actually had the math department and the English department was in the same building. So what I remember from those early years was that it seemed like we had an opportunity to see people from other divisions quite frequently. And that was a nice thing, I thought.
So I mean, let's talk a little about the East Campus. I mean, I know there were prefabs that were designed to last 10 years, although they were used for 30 years. So was the interaction different because of the mixture of faculty in the same building?
I thought it was. I thought it was really nice to have that opportunity, and I believe I'm not exactly sure it was in the other buildings. I know we were math and English, and then English moved over to the other building. I'm not sure if you were ever down there, or were you in the...
I was down there, but when I started, my office was in the Low building, but I actually taught on the East Campus, which I think made for a lot more friendships to blossom. Like, my friends when I first started are still my friends today. I mean, Kate and I became close friends, math, and I had lots of friends in the English department. Elaine Horn and I are still very, very close friends. Joan Paterna in psychology. So we had a real mixture of friendships that are still there today. And I think we weren't limited at that time to just being friends with people in our department or in our division. We really got to meet everyone in the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you both were here, well, early to mid-'80s, and obviously you're here as adjuncts in 2011. So what changes have you seen in 25, 30 years? Let's talk about changes among the students. Are the students different, or are they the same as they were in the mid-'80s?
I think my students, all of my classes have always had a prerequisite on them. So I can't personally say that my students are any weaker or any stronger than they were back then. I think the work ethic may have changed among some students. I think some students today feel that if they come to class, they don't have to do anything at home. And maybe that's only my personal perception. But I feel ability-wise they're the same.
I agree. I think that ability-wise they're the same. I think we always have such a wide spectrum of ability levels and also a wide spectrum of commitments. You know, certainly the older returning students are very committed to achieving and getting their degrees, and they usually have very set plans on what they want to do. Some of the younger students that are right out of high school just are not really sure yet what they want to do, and sometimes, as Pat mentioned, I think their high school experience especially can be something where just showing up maybe was enough for them to pass a course, and so they don't really have sometimes the necessary work ethic that they need. That's why I think courses like the SD course and preparing students to know what it's going to be like to be in college and how it is different than high school is an important thing for them to see.
Now, Kate, did you work under Mark Fonda or Mario Fiandella?
I did work under the one and only Mark Fonda and Mario Fiandella. Yes, I did.
What were each of them like?
I think it was wonderful working for Mark, and at the time, Toby Tamarkin was the division director for the humanities, and I felt like whenever we had our division meetings, they were very academic. We spent a lot of time discussing teaching strategies and course offerings and what we could offer as a department, and I felt like that was our focus back then. And Mark was a wonderful, wonderful teacher and a wonderful division director, I think.
And Pat, who...
When I first started part-time, Fred Ramey was our division director. And Fred was very, very old-fashioned, and he thought, I think, that women, their primary occupation should be being a wife and a mother. But saying that, he was also very, very supportive of the women in his division. When I started, unfortunately, Fred, full-time, Fred had passed away, and Dick Vizard, who, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man, became our division director. And he, too, really thought teaching was of primary importance. When I started, he said, now you, of course, know there's this 20% or 9-hour requirement. And I said, yes, of course, and I know I have to, do a lot more in addition to my teaching. And he said, absolutely not. He said, your first year, I want your focus to be teaching. And he said, whatever you do, it has to relate to your teaching. And I think that took a lot of pressure off of me. I didn't have to worry being on committees or whatever else I was going to do for that 9 hours, because he said, no. He said, I want you to work on your teaching. And I think that was a big help to me.
Now, you're both still teaching, and I know, Kate, you had an anecdote where a student who's currently in your class this fall had some comment about the college. Can you kind of recall that?
Yes, it wasn't. I'm not teaching here this semester, okay. But it was a student that we ran into last night. He was working as a waiter at a restaurant, and the conversation came around to what do you do, and he said, well, I go to MCC, and he says, he had just started here. He said, it's not that great a school. And I thought, well, you're talking to the wrong person here. So I decided I was not going to let that go as a comment. And I said, well, I have to disagree with you. I said, I personally think it is a very, very great school. And I think that the opportunities that are here for students are really quite amazing. These are students that probably maybe never thought of college until maybe they didn't know what to do next in their life or something, and it really is an opportunity that is not available anywhere else. I don't think that a lot of these students would ever succeed if they went to a UConn or even Central or one of these schools. I think that we offer them an opportunity to succeed where it's not available anywhere else. So that's why I think it's a great school, and I also think, just like Pat was talking about when she started, the focus on teaching, I think that's a unique function or a unique value or direction that the faculty have at a community college that they may not have at other schools. There may be pressure at other universities to research or publish, or we don't have that pressure so much, and I think we have the opportunity to focus on what we really do best, which is teaching.
And Pat, you had an incident where you ran into
I had the
a
exact
student in the
opposite
store.
reaction in a way, and this is with a student that had been here, who I had quite a few years ago in one of my accounting classes, and he's not finished yet with his degree. He only takes 2 classes a semester, and I saw him in Stop and Shop, and he came up to me and he went, "Professor Cook." And of course, I didn't know who he was, but I read his little name, and he said, "I just want to let you know that I just love MCC, and I loved your class, and it's because of you and MCC that I decided to continue my education." And I agree with Kate. I think it's a great place, especially, well, I guess for everyone, but especially for high school students that don't know what they want to do. And for many of them, when they get here, they're very, very, very successful, and then they decide they want to continue their education. Many of my students have gone on to far surpass me in education. Okay, they've gone on, they've gotten PhDs, and one of my students that I had previously is currently teaching here part-time. So,
I would just wanted to add one thing. I had a student that when we were talking about this interview earlier, I was reminiscing about a particular student who was actually from Africa, a very small little community in Africa, and she had met her husband who was in the Peace Corps, and they had moved back. They actually lived in Bolton, Connecticut, and she had really no math education whatsoever as a young girl in this little town that she lived in Africa. And she came here and she wanted to major in math. So she started out and she took our very first math class, which at that time was called Math 98, which was the pre-algebra. Then she took Algebra 1, she took Algebra 2. She had to take a few of these classes twice. She took pre-calculus, she took Calculus 1, Calculus 2, differential equations, and Calculus 3. And I just thought, what an amazing person she was to be able to start at really almost a computational level and get all the way through our calculus sequence. And then she went on to Eastern and actually earned a degree in mathematics.
I'm going to ask both of you to reflect on the time you were teaching here. And are there any funny or amusing incidents that really stand out? Possibly dealing with colleagues or dealing with students?
you go first.
Well, we can talk about our trip to Washington. Pat and I and Marlene Camper were invited by Jonathan to go to Washington, D.C. to a conference that was administrators, I believe.
Yeah, American Association of Higher Ed, or
something
I don't know,
like
university
that.
professors.
Yeah. Yes. So we arrived in Washington to a snowstorm. And
a blizzard.
Yeah, mostly everything in Washington was closed, except for this conference that we were at. But most of the talks were administrative types of talks. So the three of us thought we really didn't have anything, that we couldn't even find one session that we necessarily wanted to go to. So one of the things that was running was a little bus that went around Washington and stopped at all the different monuments. So we decided that we would just kind of sneak out of this conference and travel around Washington and see all the museums. And I remember, I think the first one we went to was the Holocaust Museum, which had literally just opened.
And it was awesome. It really was. And when we went through the Holocaust Museum, we thought this would take us like 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we would maybe rush back to the hotel and catch the next session. Well, the Holocaust Museum took us hours. So we missed the next session and the next session. And then we decided, okay, we would go back to the conference like little kids and sneak in, the three of us. And we thought that the president would never realize, out of all these people, that we were missing. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there, and how would he miss just the three of us?
However,
he did. He did.
He wondered where we all were that day, and we couldn't say that we were at a session because we hadn't been at any. So
we told the truth. and we told the truth. And to make a long story short, we were really afraid of this. When we told him, he said, we'll meet for dinner at 6 o'clock at the piano or something like that. So for the next couple of hours, we didn't go to the next session either. We kind of talked about how we were going to convince him that this was okay. But
he was fine with it.
he was fine with it. He really was fine with it and wanted to know all about the Holocaust Museum. And I think Marlene Camper did a very good thing. She bought a book for herself, and we kind of gave it to him like we brought this for him. And so it worked out fine. It really did.
Very good stuff.
But we've had so many incidents where we've gotten together outside of the school, where talk was always yes about teaching, but it was always about our personal families too. I think I know a lot about Kate's family. I think she knows a lot about my family. And that's what MCC was. MCC truly was a family. And it was an extended family. It wasn't just the people that worked here. My 3 boys really felt comfortable being here. They would come in, and Bob, I think my youngest son, did an internship with you when he was 10 years old. My 2 older boys were the ball boys on the basketball team. And they were always here, and they always felt comfortable being here. And so we really were an extended family. And I think I knew Kate's children. She knew my children. You and I were talking before this interview. What were we talking about? Our children, because I remember all about your children.
I'd like each of you to reflect back on your time here and maybe indicate what your greatest accomplishment is, or perhaps the thing that you're most proud of when you consider your career at MCC. Something you did, or just the way you taught, or maybe a student who you had a huge impact on.
Well, I think the thing I'm most proud of was, I think, and maybe this isn't going to sound good coming from me, but I think my greatest achievement here was that I think I was a pretty good teacher, and I think I influenced a lot of lives. One of my students, and we talked about Mark too, this is the student that's now teaching here. The reason I got to know Mark so well is he was in one of my accounting classes. He was mid-20s at the time, and he walked in the first day of class, and he had his motorcycle helmet, and a large man, and he sat in the very front of class, and in this class also was, I'm going to say, the only student I ever had that was problematic in 25 years. I had this problematic student, and he stood up, Mark did, and he pointed to this one student, and he said, there were 30 of us in this class, 29 of us want to learn, and you're the only one that doesn't. So here's your option. Either stay and keep your mouth shut, or get out. And the rest of the class clapped. And I thought, this will be my favorite student for the rest of my life. And that's what the students are like, I think. I think most of the students are here to learn, and they don't want other students interrupting their education. So I think the thing I'm most proud of is my teaching. And, that same president had asked me once on a TV program, is teaching a science or an art? And back then, I said, well, I think it's both, a science and an art, and I still do. But reflecting over it now, I also think that to be a good teacher, you also have to love what you're really doing. Okay? It's not something that you learn in books. It's not something that you learn at conferences about how to be a good teacher. But deep down, you have to understand that this is something you really enjoy doing. And that's why I'm here now, because I really still enjoy teaching.
Well, she said it perfectly. I can't agree more. I remember when we first started, we both actually worked in the Learning Center doing some tutoring hours. And that was when I first met Pat. And she had the patience and the ability to explain things that I really thought was amazing. And
so did Kate, by the way.
And just to have that ability to sit down and take something that's technical, like accounting or like math, and to try to find different ways to explain it so that people can understand it, I think is challenging, but it's also exciting. It makes for a career that it's always creative. You're always trying a new technique. In the math department while I was here, Kathy Bavlis was our department chair, and Kathy had just such a vision of where math was going to go here at MCC. And she really brought us from the very traditional hands-on computation to much more practical graphing skills and applications. And I really think she had a big influence on my teaching and certainly on the entire department. And when I look back on my career, I feel the same as Pat. I look back on students whose lives you really have an opportunity to impact, and the students are very, very appreciative of that. I just met a student at UConn who was in one of my classes here, and she has always struggled with math, and so now she was a graphic designer, and she was graduating from UConn, and she just needed one course, which was statistics at UConn, and she was in a course that one of my colleagues at UConn taught. And so we had many talks about her to make sure that she did okay, and she had all the time that she needed. And it was important to me to make sure that he understood how hardworking and dedicated she was, and how important it was for her to succeed, which she did. So I think the students and their impact on both of us, I think, or all of us, is what's made my memories of MCC the most strong.
Let me throw out one question, which may be the final question. If you were talking to someone who just was hired to begin his or her teaching career at MCC, what advice would you give to that person?
I think my advice as a math teacher, and probably you would feel the same way, is to really be open-minded about the ability levels that these students come to us with. Sometimes, because you're a teacher in that particular field, like math, maybe it was something that came easier to you. And I think it's important to stop and think about where some of our students are actually coming from. Some of their academic backgrounds are so weak that you really need to get to a very basic level and to try to explain things in a variety of different ways so that it will make sense. Because often in math, people will say, well, I was fine until I had Mrs. So-and-so in the 5th grade, and now I can't figure out fractions. And then beyond that, they couldn't do anything. So most people who come with any type of math anxiety, they can tell you exactly where that anxiety level occurred, whether it was in 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade. And so to be able to stop and say, meet these students at that level, and to have the ability to explain it so that they can truly understand it and they can move on, I think that would be my advice.
And I agree with Kate. And I think that we have to understand, whether we've been here for 25 years or if we're brand new, that students come to us with all different types of learning abilities. Mm-hmm. So we really have to model our teaching to match how they learn best. For example, some of our students learn best working independently. Some of our students work best working in groups. And so we have to use both in our classes. We have to have them working independently at times and having them working with groups at times. Some students learn best by reading. Some students learn best by doing. So I think we have to vary, and new teachers too, have to vary their teaching methods all the time. And we're very, very fortunate in the community college system in Connecticut, and that we have an organization called the Center for Teaching. And these are things that Kate and I have been a part of, where they're constantly offering programs at all 12 of the colleges, as well as at individual colleges, on new ideas in teaching. I remember one of the first things we did was a thing called Teaching Partners, mm-hmm. where people from 2 different disciplines got together and visited each other's class. And at first you think it's going to be frightening, but it's not. It's really very, very enjoyable. And you sit in the other person's class and you talk about what they're doing, what you're doing, and how you think you could change things. And really, by sitting in other classes, I really learned a lot of things that I could adapt to my own classroom. So I think partaking in these Center for Teaching activities is also a thing I would recommend to new teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that either of you would like to add to the conversation?
Well, I think that probably after listening to us, I think we both would agree that this was a wonderful career, and being at MCC was just a wonderful place to be, and I have a lot of very fond memories of it.
I agree. And, people, especially like my husband or my relatives, they would say to me, are you going to work tomorrow? And it used to make me laugh when they'd say work. And I always referred to it as, I'm going to school. It wasn't work. It wasn't a job. It was school. And it was just something so much more pleasant than the term work. I love teaching. I know Kate loved teaching. I loved everything about MCC. And personally, I've been gone 3 years now, but I hope it never changes. I know that technology is going to have an influence, but I just hope that the family-like atmosphere that we got to enjoy never changes. One of the fabulous things we used to do is we used to teach each other's classes. I mean, I remember teaching a math class or a psych class or an English class, and I remember people coming in teaching my class, and the students actually liked it because it gave a different perspective. I didn't do it for a long time, but if someone had to leave class early for a very important reason, instead of letting the class out 45 minutes early, I'd go in. Or they'd come into my class, and it was great. And the students actually liked it.
Thank you.